Why do I think that single-player games are superior, and why are they taking over the industry? A quick disclaimer, this is a very subjective video based on my own opinions surrounding the matter, and nothing I say should be taken too seriously, as I do still firmly believe multiplayer games have their place, just not in my world. At least, not anymore. I think it's important to establish the timeline of my gaming journey to give some context to how I've come to this conclusion. I am now currently 25 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I have been into gaming. My first hook was Pokemon on the Nintendo DS. Even to this day, at 25 years old, I still have some interest in Pokemon, and I'll occasionally watch a Nuzlocke here and there. But the games I easily spent the most time on was Call of Duty, and that started around the age of 11. A friend came over and he bought the original Modern Warfare 2, and I clicked immediately with this game. I was hooked. I found that I had a natural talent for the controls, and with some practice I quickly became the best player in my friend group, and a strong player in general for my age. And that's not just my ego talking, it's the truth. But I was only the best because I had to be the best. This was one thing I found I was really good at, and it gave me an immense feeling of satisfaction when I was able to consistently prove to my friends and to strangers that I was better than them at this random video game. Now, this does speak more to my own character than to the game itself, but nevertheless, I think it's important to mention. And this carried over into high school and then eventually into university. Now, I did dabble in some single-player games along the way here and there, like GTA 5, Skyrim, and Red Dead Redemption. And once I completed the games, I usually put them down for good, and went back to what I did best. Then, when COVID hits, I spend an inordinate amount of time playing Warzone with my friends every day. It started off great, and I had a really fun time playing with them. But during this time, I also sustained a serious ankle injury and was unable to walk for around 6 months. And this was when I really grinded the game to an unhealthy level. Even when my friends weren't on, you best believe I was on. Fast forward a couple years, I eventually get bored of Call of Duty, rinsing and repeating the same game, and I find my new hook, Valorant. And oh boy, do I have a lot to say about that game. But we'll get to that in a little bit. As I start to grow older with a bit more life experience, I discover the true beauty and masterpiece that is Elden Ring. And slowly, over the last few years, I've been deleting all my multiplayer games, and I've never looked back since. Okay, now that I've established a timeline, let's get into the nitty-gritty details. I'd first like to talk about multiplayer games and what are their flaws in today's day and age. And I need to specify in today's day and age, because some of these flaws don't apply to the older games. Okay, for my first point, number 1, they are competitive. Now don't get me wrong, I enjoy competition and humans are competitive by nature, and some of my fondest schooling memories were on the sports field. But the difference in gaming is that it's competitive with no repercussions. Let me tell you what I mean. For example, on the football field, if you do something against the rules or against the spirit of the game, you'll get a red card and get sent off. You acted like an asshole and you were punished accordingly. This does not hold up in a game like Valorant. You can be the nastiest human being on earth, project all your insecurities and problems within your own life onto others, and just be an awful person, and there is absolutely no consequences. There is a psychological term called operant conditioning, which describes how human behavior is learned and reinforced. A specific version of this is negative punishment in operant conditioning. A simple example of this is if a child behaves badly, their parent will take away their phone or their toys so that the child learns that if they do this behavior again, they will be subject to some adverse consequence of that behavior. Now, we've all experienced this in some way or another. This negative reinforcement does not occur in the competitive gaming scene. Yes, you could argue that people get banned and whatnot, but boom, new account made 5 minutes later, and we're back to square one. When combined, anonymity, a competitive environment, and a lack of punishment can create an incredibly toxic environment. Anyone who has experienced competitive Valorant will tell you this, and I must admit, I am not innocent. I became an unlikable, miserable, shitty person when thrust into that environment. Furthermore, having been a talented multiplayer gamer in the past, I now had this delusional ego where I found it really difficult to accept when other players were better than me. It was always luck or some other random bullshit that got me killed, and never a skill issue. I vividly remember the defining moment of when I uninstalled Valorant for good. I was losing a game, getting frustrated that I was being destroyed. I was talking an awful lot of smack in the chat, and the other team were just laughing at me. Then, the very next round, I whiff so badly and I get humiliated by the very same players who I was insulting. I immediately rage quit the game and uninstalled it because I could not bear their responses. I frankly deserved and needed that humiliation, and I'm glad that it happened, and I really hope that I gave my opponents a good laugh. But I can only see this in hindsight. At the time, I felt only rage. I was often ashamed of the person that I would become in this environment, and I started to realize that I really didn't want my character to be defined by that person I would become in-game. And the best way to avoid becoming that person was just to not play these games at all. Okay, but let's move on to my next point, which is more of a recent issue with multiplayer games. The top-tier multiplayer game developers are soulless. There is little to no love for their creations, only corporate greed, and it all started with the bloody Fortnite Battle Pass system. Now, I would like to acknowledge that from a business perspective, the Fortnite business model was absolute genius. Make the game free to bring in a larger amount of players and then fuck them with microtransactions is a brilliant idea, and whoever came up with that idea has earned my respect. But the unfortunate byproduct of this is that other companies have also started losing their souls. I have spent a bunch of money on microtransactions across many games, and looking back on all that wasted money leaves a sour and somewhat shameful taste in my mouth. They seem to care more about designing nice skins than improving the core aspects of their games. I do understand that they're a business at the end of the day, but games can maintain their integrity and still make money, and I'll be discussing some of those games later. A further unintentional byproduct of the Fortnite system is that most of the top multiplayer games are free. Now, this is a good thing in many ways, but one area where it's really bad is that it renders the banning system completely irrelevant. If all you need to do is make a new email and create a new account with no monetary penalty, then what is the point in being banned at all? Of course, no one is really to blame for this, but it still sucks nonetheless. But let's move on to point number 3, addiction. I would like to conduct a curious experiment with you. I'm going to read you some of the universally recognized criteria for meeting the definition of alcoholism as per the DSM-5. But I will replace the word drink or drinking with playing ranked. Okay. Have you had times where you ended up playing ranked more or longer than you intended? Continue to play ranked even though it was causing trouble with your family or friends? Given up or cut back on activities that were important or interesting to you in order to play ranked? Continued to play ranked even though it was making you feel depressed or anxious? To many of you watching this, you probably can't relate, but I guarantee you that there will be a portion of you who can relate. Gaming addiction is a serious issue that doesn't quite get the attention it needs, and I've only ever felt symptoms like this with multiplayer games and never whilst playing a single player. Of course, this is just me trying to make a comparison and doesn't necessarily mean you have a gaming addiction if you identify with some of these. But I just found it scary to think about when realizing I had identified with some of these at certain points in my life. I find it difficult to explain in words why I've only felt like this during multiplayer games and not single player games. It may be due to my own life circumstances at the time, who knows. But I still felt like it was important to bring up. I don't think you need to hear me explain why addictions are bad either. But I've been shitting on multiplayer games enough. How about some good things? Playing with your friends is really enjoyable and can heighten the experience greatly. This is an undeniable fact, but unfortunately, as you grow older, the chances to engage consistently in games with your friends diminishes greatly. People get jobs, have their own lives, and lose interest in the games you still love. And this brings me to my next point, which is entirely to do with me and not the games itself. Aging and maturing affects your preferences and opinions. I doubt if I was currently 15 or 16 whether I'd care that a game's community is toxic or whether the game was chokeholding me with microtransactions. All I'd care about is playing the game and there would be no feelings of guilt nor shame. I'm sure you've all seen those memes of people saying when they get home from work they just want a relaxing gaming experience just to get shit on by some 16-year-old. And this is unfortunately true. Whilst playing multiplayer games, I've never been relaxed. I was always upright in my chair, trying so hard to do the best I could. That doesn't sound relaxing to me. Wait, wasn't I supposed to be saying good things about multiplayer? Oh yeah. Okay, so one good thing is that you don't have to play ranked. People feel like once they've experienced some enjoyment in climbing the ladder, that they are obligated to always play ranked. Some of my most enjoyable times playing Valorant was chilling on a Friday night and playing unranked. I remember I actually had fun interacting with strangers in a non-competitive environment, but I am pretty competitive in general, so I could only do this for so long before hopping straight back into ranked. Okay, we've talked about the flaws of multiplayer games enough, but now it's time to switch the focus onto the strengths of single-player games and why I think that they are better. Single-player games have several strengths, which I think appeal more to older gamers like myself. They are actually relaxing. Sit back on your couch and enjoy the exploration and the journey that they take you on. Humans are obsessed with a good story and equally inclined to explore their surroundings. Now, one may argue that some humans are afraid to explore too far into the unknown, but that fear is eradicated when you aren't actually exploring in real life, but merely at your computer, which means that wondrous feeling of exploration is there for everyone and not just the adventurous types. But one of the greatest strengths that I've only recently come to realize is that single-player games can indirectly teach you self-accountability. And I'm going to use Souls-like games as an example here, as I'm sure you may have noticed all the footage for this video is from Souls-like games, as at the moment they are by far my favorite, and it's not even close. In multiplayer games, you always blame something else, like your teammates, the opponent getting lucky, or whatever your coping excuse is. You can't do this in FromSoft games. If you die or make a mistake, it is almost always entirely your fault, and there is never anyone else to blame but yourself. Realizing this is not just valuable for improving at the game, but 100% carries over into real life. When you stop blaming the world around you and take a closer look at yourself, your life circumstances will improve in the long run. There is a degree of perfectionism in these games. I am not someone who plays these games once. I grind the ever-living hell out of them to become as efficient and skillful as I can against the bosses. Whilst other great single-player games shine in areas like exploration and story, such as Red Dead 2, FromSoft games shine in their replayability. They almost become their own craft, and you will do whatever you can to hone your skills in that craft to become the best craftsman that you can. If there's one thing I've learned at my 25 years of age, is that the greatest amount of satisfaction I will get from my life is forever seeking improvement and perfection in my chosen crafts, whatever they may be. But even if you don't seek perfection in these games, they still have something for you. The exploration rivals and arguably even exceeds games like Red Dead 2, and the storyline and lore is certainly worth engaging with if you're into it. Or you can just binge watch all of VaatiVidya's videos every now and then. Same thing really. One very interesting phenomenon that I picked up on is that your level of anger and frustration at the game have inverse relationships between the genres. I found that the better I got at Call of Duty and Valorant, the angrier and more frustrated I would become at the game. Whereas in Souls-like games, I was fuming in my first few playthroughs, but upon mastering the mechanics, I now hardly ever get angry, and I always attribute my deaths to a fault of my own. In my opinion, this speaks to the longevity advantage single-player games have in terms of preserving your mental health at least. I thought this was pretty interesting the more I thought about it. Now, I don't want this video to turn into a FromSoft fanboy video, even though I am. A more direct comparison that I can make between the two genres of games that applies to all single-player and multiplayer games is the level of passion you can feel went into developing the game. I mentioned earlier that multiplayer developers are soulless and have no love for their games, and I really do believe this. You can feel it when you play these games, and it's more apparent than ever when you switch to a single-player game and you can feel the love that went into it. God of War, Grand Theft Auto, Red Dead Redemption, Sekiro, Elden Ring. The level of detail in these games are simply astounding at times, and they can feel more like artwork than games. An artist without passion for his work is no artist at all. Also, why the fuck is Black Ops 6 300 gigs? 300! That is ridiculous. For comparison, Elden Ring plus the DLC is maybe around 50 gigs total, and if you've played those games, you know how much content is in there and how massive that game is. And to fit that all into 50 gigs is honestly impressive. So why the fuck does Call of Duty have 300 gigs worth of space? It just speaks to very poor game development in my eyes. I can't comprehend that. Okay, sorry about that. Just got a little bit angry there. Anyway, this is bringing me towards the end of the video. I'd like to finish off with a couple closing statements. The title of this video is in fact a lie. Single-player games aren't really taking over, and multiplayer is still as popular as ever before. But in my life, it certainly feels like single-player really is taking over. I don't own any multiplayer games, I don't get them recommended on my YouTube, and in general, I've found myself distanced from the genre. And quite frankly, I couldn't be happier. I'd really like to know your thoughts in the comments below on which genre you guys prefer. My small audience is built off only Elden Ring, so there will probably be some bias, but hey, I hope you guys enjoyed my thoughts and my ranting. Until next time.